Hello and welcome to Video Revealed. I'm Colin Smith. Today we're going to talk about the differences between CMYK, RGB, and hexadecimal. So I created this tutorial because I got a question about color modes. And to me, a light bulb went off and I realized that a lot of people don't come from a print background and they might not understand the differences between RGB, CMYK, and HEX. So let's break that down. Why they're different, how to pick the colors, and some of the problems you can run into. And at the end, I'm going to show you a little bit of other colors that we can get. So I've got some cracker boxes here, and I'm going to tell you a horror story about working with color and color science and spectrophotometers at the end of this. Okay, so let's break the terms down. RGB, red, green, blue. This is what most people are used to. It's what you use in your camera, your monitor, your television. That's all RGB. CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Why is black K? Because it's called the key color, not because it can be confused with the B in blue. K is the key color. We're not going to be talking about K in this sense because it's more about cyan, magenta, and yellow. And the understanding behind that, in addition to black being a different kind of color, it's used to make things have a rich black color. So if you tried to print full CMY, it's still not, it's kind of a muddy brown. It's not really a black. So in the printing world, they'll use black. It's also cheaper, and black is good for text. So CMYK is a subtractive mode. So that means that as you're adding color, you're actually subtracting light. So the more color you add, you get black because the no colors are basically the substrate you're printing on or the paper you're printing on. That's why in a CMYK world, no colors means white. In an RGB, it's additive. No colors is black. And as you start adding colors, then you add the color itself. You're adding that in. And hexadecimal, don't worry about that. But primarily, you're thinking about how these colors are added. Then there's also the color model. And this is why colors don't look exactly the same when you're converting between these modes. Let's look at this chart here. This is what the human eye can see. So we can see all of those colors. The RGB value is in this triangle. So RGB cannot represent every single thing that we see. It's a restricted amount of colors. That's why when you look outside, you see realistic color. And when you see something on a television, you know it's not as real. Now, HDR is getting us close, but that's for another topic. And here is what CMYK can give you. So it's even smaller than the RGB. So that right there should tell you if you're trying to convert something between RGB to CMYK, CMYK is more restrictive and you're going to lose or change those values. And that's just because the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black cannot print every single thing that an RGB color model can show. So let's start in Photoshop and I'll show you the differences when we convert from RGB to CMYK. This is a really easy test to show. So in this document, I've got 6 swatches. This is red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow. Now, even in cyan, magenta, and yellow, if I'm in an RGB document, so in the mode of Photoshop, when you're creating new documents, by default, you're most likely going to be creating them in RGB color. In CMYK color, which we'll show you in a second, that's different. There's also the proofing that's going on. So Photoshop is always trying to show you the most accurate representation of your colors. So you can force Photoshop to be in a CMYK mode, even though you're in RGB colors. So remember, the larger shape, it will actually dull all of these colors down for CMYK. Don't use this if you're in the video world or in the web world. This is only if you're restricting in the printing world. I also have my color panel showing up here, and I'll grab my eyedropper. So I'll click on red and you can see I get 255. There's 256 levels as opposed in RGB versus 100 levels in CMYK. So 255 because you start counting at 0, which is 1 less. So 255 is 100% red. That's 100% green. That's 100% blue. Now, if I come down here to the cyan mode, you'll see If I change these to CMYK sliders, you'll see this isn't showing me cyan, magenta, and yellow because we're in an RGB document. If you want to be in CMYK, then you create a CMYK document. And then down at the bottom, I've got a gradient here showing all of the different colors. When you're in this color mode here, this gradient down at the bottom, if you right click, you can actually show different spectrums. So that's the CMYK spectrum. And if we go back to the RGB spectrum and limit this to web safe colors, you can see we get even fewer colors. There are 216 web safe colors. And the reason those were restricted is because you're trying to make the exact same color or as close as possible between browsers on both Mac and Windows. And the color systems can be slightly different. So that helps you represent those colors a little bit better. Let's turn that off. All right. So let's close that up. And what I'm going to do is I'll duplicate this document and I'll call it CMYK. It's still RGB. Let's change this just so we know what it is. Okay. Now I'm going to arrange my, so here's my color, CMYK, okay? Now I'll go to the image mode and I'll change this. And you'll see I get a warning. I'm gonna not flatten these. This is the conversion options that you're choosing. So this right away should alert you to the fact that there is no global RGB to CMY conversion. Photoshop abides by the correct scientific rules, and it's telling me, oh, you better pick a conversion method. And this one is swap coded, which is typically what the pre-press world is based on. So you can tell it to not show it again. So now pay attention to what happens here, especially to the RGB. Click OK. And look at that. Look at how much duller the green is and the blue. Even the yellow is muddy. They're all muddier colors coming from RGB. So we've already restricted all of those colors. So if somebody has a print color, can that print color be represented in RGB? Maybe. You have to test it, see if it is. If the client is expecting a color, it's best for you to understand when something is going from one color to the next. Okay, so that's a typical conversion. Let me show you where things can get really confusing, and that's on Adobe's site for creating colors. So you can extract a color from an image. So you can see I've loaded those same swatches into color.adobe.com. This is a flattened image. And you can see it's picking up the colors. If we go back over to our color wheel, we can see down at the bottom the RGB colors represented here. There are 5, so we can't get all 6 in here. But this will give you a good indication of what happens when you change this. Pay attention to the gradient. That's where you'll see the biggest change. So I'll switch now to CMYK. Did you see that? It's not as obvious as the side-by-side I did in Photoshop, but the whole thing gets slightly duller, and these colors are duller. This is really easy for someone to miss if they're not paying attention. Or if you have a really crappy monitor, maybe you can't even see that. I'm displaying this on a 4K display here. It's my Dell laptop, and the display is remarkable. So I can see a huge difference. That again should alert you that things are different. And you get the colors down here, but a lot of people might think those colors are the same. Now, if I go back to RGB, you didn't see a color change because we've already reduced the amount of colors. So there's this whole back and forth thing going on between colors that anytime you're converting a color to another color is a problem. Now, what a client should have is they should have this done for you if they have a branding document. Usually branding documents have all of these colors, the CMYK print version, the RGB version. But if they don't, they're expecting you to understand these colors. Let's have a look in Premiere Pro. Premiere Pro, I've loaded that same Photoshop document here in the source monitor, and you can see it loads in. Why don't I have the CMYK loaded in Premiere Pro? Because CMYK is not compatible in Premiere Pro. You can't load it. If you tried to import that in as a TIFF or a PSD, Premiere Pro would just say, I can't do it, because it's just the wrong thing to put in Premiere Pro. So if you had to get that converted document, let's go back and show you that in Photoshop. So if I wanted this CMYK document in Premiere Pro, then I would have to go back to the mode, change this to RGB. Now I could save that, and now the dull version of this would go back into Premiere Pro. But you're really cheating. This isn't CMYK, it's an RGB representation of the CMYK. All right, let's have a look at the Essential Graphics panel, and I've created the same colors here: red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow. And I've created those just with the shapes and the colors in the Essential Graphics panel. So if I click on the fill color here, you can see down at the bottom RGB, and I've got this cranked up to 255 red. Now, by the way, I do have a great tutorial about the color picker. These are all different in each Adobe applications, and some are more powerful and some are easier to use. Watch my tutorial. I'll link that at the end too. So that's 100% red, and this one 100% green, and this one 100% blue. Now, I don't have any CMYK sliders, so what happens if I click on the cyan? Now you'll see the RGB representation of the cyan color. You'll also see the hex color down in here. And you'll get this warning up here telling me that this is not a broadcast safe color. So now we've got yet another part of this whole equation that's a problem. This is only for people going out to broadcast. It's really easy for all of these colors to not make the broadcast limit. I've got another tutorial on running a video limiter that you can run, and it again will dumb these down. It's kind of like the print thing. It's the bright RGB colors going to CMYK and being dulled down. The bright RGB colors going out to broadcast video, and the video limiter dumbs them down and dulls them and makes them fit so they don't exceed the broadcast limits. But that's the RGB value that and I picked this over here. So I grabbed the eyedropper and I picked this color from here instead of making it myself. I wanted to see what the Essential Graphics panel eyedropper was picking from the Photoshop RGB. So here is the magenta document, magenta color, and you can see there's that color and the yellow, and that's that color in here. And of course, you've got representations of all of those. You can see how we're also getting that warning again. So now let's talk about this. This is fun. I used to do this with my daughter when she was really young because I came from the print world, and I started telling her about spot colors. Well, what the heck are spot colors? Well, anytime you have packaging like this, you know, let's go to some famous Ritz crackers. Do you know how hard it would be to print this red every time, this accurate at every printing press all around the world? It's impossible. So the way that packaging and branding companies get around this is by using spot colors. Mostly they're Pantone colors. The ink for this Ritz is a specific red ink, and they will apply this, and the same with the blue, and it will be applied and it will look exactly the same. In addition, they'll be printing CMYK for the pictures too. So the pictures of the crackers here, the pictures that, yeah, we like crackers here and lots of crackers. So if you open up, and sometimes it's on the flap, sometimes you have to tear things apart. And sometimes my wife would come in and we're having breakfast, and my daughter and I have destroyed all the cereal boxes because we're looking for these little panels. So you can see right there, there is CMYK. So there's black cyan, magenta, and yellow. So if it's 4-color picture, not all packages have, CMYK most do today because they want to have, bright pictures, but that's where the image is coming from. And your thought might be, well, can I make this brown out of CMYK? You might get close, but you're not going to get exact and you might run into problems. So you'll see over here, there is a brown and a blue. So the blue is the logo here for this package branding, and this brown is here. The same thing if we go to the Ritz, you'll see there's the Ritz, and there is the Ritz red and the Ritz blue. So that blue and that red. And they've probably, there are gradients in here. This is like a beveled, so you couldn't do this yellow with a spot yellow because there's gradients in there and it would just be too problematic. So all of these, any kind of printed product has that same thing. So again here, and we can see there's a yellow and a green. So that's the green and the yellow here that they want specific on there. So what if you need to convert a Pantone color into RGB? Can you do that? Well, you can. It might not be close at all. In fact, let's go back over to Adobe Color. And if we go to a specific swatch, so let's go to these trends. And I'll choose something very vibrant. So I'm going to grab this one here. And they're going to try really hard to match this with a Pantone. So if I click on this, you'll see the Pantone equivalents to this. And you can see some of them are pretty close. Like this yellowy orange is close. This one's pretty close. This one's not close. And this one's way off. In the Pantone list of colors, there's also different books. And down here, CMYK coded is trying to do this in CMYK, but then you can get a lot of the typical ones like Color Bridge coded, and you can see them change completely. So the Pantone colors, as far as these guys are concerned, the Pantone colors are great. They're going to match every single time. But if it's you in video and you're trying to do this, you're going to have to do some tests to see if you can represent all of these correctly. Okay, so now you're ready for my little horror story. So I wish I had the product here, but this was back in the 90s. I was a retoucher, so my job was to work in CMYK 100%. I never worked in RGB because I was working in the print world. And one of the jobs that myself and my partner had was for a cookie package. And so there are 4 different people involved. There's us, there's the designer, there's the printing company, and then there's the client, okay? So here's the idea. The designer created a mock-up, and they actually had a physical package of cookies, and they drew on it, and they created a design. The problem with their design was they used Pantone markers, and you can buy markers that are exact Pantone colors. So from a designer's point of view, it's kind of like us when we were kids and we were picking crayons. You pick these crayon colors, and you're not picking CMYK crayons, you're picking the specific names of the crayons. So she picked these, and they were all really earthy red oranges, and she was drawing all over and created this package. So the client now buys off on the design. The client thinks that's what the package should look like. At no point is anybody worried that she used Pantone colors, which are impossible to reproduce in CMYK. So now they hire us, and we're creating the same design. So one of the photographs was from the grist mill at the Pioneer Village, Black Creek Pioneer Village in Toronto, Canada. And that was on the front of the package. It was really a beautiful design. And then there was all this orange and stuff, and it looked really nice. So we got the job. we had to recreate this for print quality. So that means the crappy mock-up had to be made into high quality CMYK. And we worked really hard and we sent it off. Of course, the customer, in comparing these crappy CMYK colors on a proof, they said it didn't match. So now here comes the printing company. So they paid the printer to do a slight adjustment so that the colors matched closer. They couldn't. It was impossible because they couldn't match the Pantone colors. So they called us up and they said, you didn't do your job. You now have to pay for the printing costs, the difference on fixing that color. I'm a stickler for quality. And the buck stops with me if it's my problem, and it's not in this case. So we had a special scientific device called a spectrophotometer. And this is a device that you measure. So you would be able to put that device on a color and measure this color. And you would measure it scientifically, not based on, hey, I think it looks like it. No. So you remove the human element up from this completely. So I measured what they tweaked. So what the printer tweaked, I measured what we delivered, and there is a difference between the two. And the difference is measured in delta E's. And it was a delta E, and I'll remember this to my grave. It was a delta E difference of 6, which is enough for a human eye to recognize as different. I can't remember exactly what the difference is for a human eye not to recognize it, but a delta E difference of 6 was enough. So there was a meeting held and everybody was brought in. I came in with my scientific evidence and I presented to the customer. I said, I did what I told them what I just told you. I measured this with a spectrophotometer. The spectrophotometer tells me that it's a delta E of 6. They did not match this either. This is still different from and it's different. It's the delta E. See, now I'm even mixing this up. The delta E difference was the difference between the original package and what the printer created. So they didn't even match that, and it was still different. So I presented all of our scientific evidence, myself and my partner, and we thought, this is great. They're going to have to pay for it themselves. The printer is not going to put the money on us. And all the client had to say was, regarding the package, so they now have the package from the printer, and they said they did match it. That's all they had to say. If we wanted to keep our job with this client, we had to eat the cost and just walk away. So it's more a lesson on some of the trials and tribulations of working with a client. As far as they were concerned, they didn't have a spectrophotometer. They didn't tell me their readings were different. Their eyes said, yeah, it's the same, you pay. So we paid, and we got the paid to do our part of the job, but it was just reduced by what the printer had to do. And it was one that's bugged me since the 90s. Maybe I should let this go. Okay, wow. So if you hung around for this whole story, now you know the trials and tribulations of working in CMYK and Pantone and RGB and all of that. Hey, if you're new to Video Revealed and you want to if you thought this was useful, take a moment and subscribe. You want to support us some more, you can do that through PayPal. There's a link in the description and on the front of the channel. Till next time, I'm Colin Smith, and it's my job to keep you armed with as much information possible so that you can make the right decisions in the world of color marketing.